But do you denounce Russian aggression? Do you find anything wrong with the fact that Russia intervened directly in Ukraine, went to war in contravention of the UN Charter? Do you denounce that?
My guy, we're with Russia. We're not denouncing Russia. And we'll give it weapons if we're a state. There's no confusion about that.
Well, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says that 24,000, not combatants, civilians, have died in Ukraine. And the majority of these civilians, some of whom are children, about 1,000, have died under the consequences of bombing and explosions. So the question is not necessarily one of just geopolitics. It's also a moral question about the loss of innocent life to the tune of 24,000 people. And that matters, doesn't it?
It does, but there will always be casualties in war, especially when the leadership of your country doesn't take into consideration the interest of that particular country and pursue the West, NATO, American aligned interest at the cost of their own country and their own civilians. I mean, this matter would have been resolved if Ukraine would not have allowed its expansion. So we are very sympathetic to civilians who lost life, and we will not be proud of such. But unfortunately, my guy, it's a war, and there will be casualties. It is what it is.
There are also geopolitical consequences for South Africa, because the more we push towards Russia, and if we were to follow your policy, I take it if you were in charge of South Africa's foreign policy, you would be pushing a pro-Russian alignment stance.
Yes.
That would have major real consequences for the South African economy, also geopolitically. If we just look at what's happening in the UN, South Africa's recent decision to abstain on a motion left us isolated, where 3/4 of the world supported that motion, including many African states, many states from the global south. Wouldn't it just be practically foolhardy for us to follow a pro-Russian stance when our economy and our geopolitical standing could be called into question?
Well, there are consequences for any political decision you take. The implications will be there economically. Do we have alternatives? And that's what this type of posture that has been taken by Russia seeks to create an alternative platform where we are not reliant entirely on the US, but there are other markets that can always intervene or still trade with us depending on whatever political position we take. So that's why we believe that any political position you take, there will be economic consequences. I mean, if we were to read the EFF policies, if you were to implement those policies, you ought to conscientize society and make society aware that there will be consequences for such a political decision. But a decision had to be taken, and position must be taken, and that position was going to be taken if we're in charge of our international policy.
We're in conversation with the president of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Julius Malema. Remember to continue this conversation on Twitter, where we'll try to take some of your comments.